Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Annie Black. I'm the Director of Programs and Volunteers for the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum, and we appreciate you all being with us. Before we get started, I just wanted to mention that we will have plenty of time for questions at the end of tonight's program. If you want to go ahead and locate your Q&A button, if you are on a computer, it should be at the bottom of your screen. If you are on a tablet or mobile device, it might be at the top. But anytime you have a question during the program, please feel free to click that Q&A button and type your question in, and we will answer as many as we can get to. So I'd like to go ahead and introduce Mary Pat Higgins, President and CEO of the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum. Mary Pat.
Thank you so much, Annie, and good evening, everyone. As Annie said, I'm the President and CEO of the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to tonight's program, A Journey for Justice, presented in conjunction with our special current exhibition, The Fight for Civil Rights in the South. I'd like to start this evening by supporting all of those wonderful people that are supporting this exhibition, especially the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute for making this exhibition possible. Our presenting sponsor, Cinemark Theaters. We're supported by Micon General Contractors and the Carl B. and Florence E. King Foundation. And exhibit sponsors, Bank of Texas, City of Dallas, Office of Arts and Culture, Fossil Group, State Farm, African American Forum and Minority Men Affinity Network, Employee Resource Groups at State Farm, Dallas Tourism Public Improvement District, and Texas Instruments. Our hotel sponsor is Omni Dallas Hotel, and we have a wonderful list of community partners: African American Museum of Dallas, Anti-Defamation League Texoma, Big Brothers Big Sisters Greater Dallas, Congregation Anshe Torah, Dallas Truth, Racial Healing and Transformation, Denton Black Film Festival, Grant Halliburton Foundation, Legacy Senior Communities, Refugee Services of Texas, SMU Human Rights Program, Vickery Meadows Youth Development Foundation, Wings, and World Affairs Council, Dallas Fort Worth. Wow, we are so excited to partner with all of you, and we are so grateful to our donors for making this exhibition and programs like this possible. Thank you so much. I know many of our wonderful sponsors and community partners are watching tonight, so thanks for being with us. I'd also like to give a special welcome to our board members and museum members joining us this evening. We're so grateful for all that you do to support the museum. The Fight for Civil Rights in the South combines two incredible photographic exhibitions from the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute: Selma to Montgomery, photographs by Spider Martin, and Courage Under Fire, the 1961 burning of the Freedom Riders bus, photography by Joseph Pastiglione. It has been our privilege to host this exhibition over the past year, and we are thrilled to announce the extension of its run through May 31st. We've just installed additional artifacts from our friends at the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute, and we invite you to visit the museum and explore the updated exhibition. The lessons from the civil rights movement are as relevant as ever. Tonight, I'm honored to welcome a very special speaker. We're in for such a treat. We'll be meeting with a true upstander, Daniels Rosemond. She's a native of New Orleans. She attended LSU and left the university to become a member of the Congress of Racial Equality as a freedom rider under the leadership of Dr. James Farmer. As a freedom rider, she rode across the country with other young people from many different backgrounds, facing opposition, hostility, and violence. In 1961, she nearly lost her life during a freedom ride in Poplarville, Mississippi. In 2011, the National Women's Law Center honored Rosemond along with 14 other women freedom riders in Washington, D.C. And today, Daniels Rosemond is a poet and an inspirational speaker. We are all in for such a treat. We will have time for questions at the end of tonight's program, as Annie mentioned. So please use the Q&A button located at the bottom of your screen and type out and submit your questions. And now it is my pleasure to welcome Betty Daniels Rosemond.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I am so honored to be present here tonight, and I thank God for each one of you. I am honored to share with you some of the history and the things that we went through, the things that have become necessary because coming from the Deep South, everything in New Orleans was segregated. Everything, transportation, the schools were white schools, black schools, and everything was supposed to be separate but equal. They were certainly separate, but they were not equal. So we grew up in an environment where everything was segregated. Of course, going to school, I was having fun as a teenager. I didn't pay much attention. We just did what had become necessary to do. Like if we got on a metro bus and a white person wanted the seat we were in, we had to get up and move to the back of the bus. If you didn't adhere to that you were subject to be arrested. There were many things going on in the South. And I was having a lot of fun, and I didn't pay much attention. But one day I came home from school and my mom was crying. And I asked Mom what was going on, and she had been down to register to vote. But they would not let Black people vote. They had to take a test, and this test was designed for failure. So she was saying what the test contained, and she really wanted to vote, but they were given this test, and there were questions on the test, such as how black is midnight? How many stars are in the sky? These were questions that no one could answer. Even the people who were given the test could not answer those questions. So I thought something has to be done. And that's really what got my attention, because no one want to see their mother or their father in tears. So I decided I've got to look into it. I've got to do something. Now we had organizations in New Orleans, and we had a youth group, the NAACP youth group. But we heard about an organization called CORE, and CORE was going to come to New Orleans to help with some of the problems we were going through. And they were from New York. Now, I was happy to hear that because I knew I had to do something. At the time, I was attending LSU in New Orleans. They had opened a New Orleans campus, and they had desegregated that campus. There were about a dozen Black students who signed to go there. And I went to LSU, and I was there until the civil rights movement really started to get active. I dropped out of LSU because I wanted to take part in the movement, civil rights. I had to do something. So I began to go down. The Freedom Riders came from New York. And I want to tell you this. When the bus was bombed that they were on, there were two buses. When the bus was bombed in Anniston, Alabama, there were 13 Freedom Riders on that bus. And also, I want to tell you this. Freedom Riders did not charter buses. They would go down to a segregated bus station and buy a ticket and get on a bus, and there were other passengers on those buses. So this is how all of this really started and was going. The bus that was coming down south to help us, that bus was bombed in Addison, Alabama. And that was on my birthday. That was May 14th. So, I really had to do something. It was like, I've got to do something. So they were going to meet us at our church that night, and they were going to have a meeting with a group of young people that wanted to work with them and wanted to learn more about the movement. They did not make it to the meeting at that time. In fact, some of them were sent back to New York, and they didn't make it at that time, but eventually they did get down to help us in New Orleans, help us organize. There were many things going on in New Orleans. As I said, everything was segregated. There were downtown, there was F.W. Woolworth, and Woolworth had separate lunch counters. The Black people had to sit in the back of F.W. Woolworth at the lunch counter. And that was another thing. My mom would go shopping, and she always loved to stop in Woolworth for lunch. Now, we couldn't continue to do that because CORE, when they came and after our training, and we were trained to be nonviolent. And that was very important because you had to be nonviolent and to be a member of CORE. I had some students at one of the colleges here that had me come back again last February, and they wanted to know, how do you become nonviolent? And I told them this: you have to love as we are commanded by the Lord to love one another. We're commanded to do His will, and you have to learn to love Him and to love one another. So we went through the training. It was not an easy thing, but some of the members of CORE, they trained us. And by training, they would harass us at the meeting. They would call us names. Every now and then they would shove you around to make sure you would not retaliate, because they knew we were going to have a lot of things coming against us. One day while picketing on the picket line in front of Woolworth, and every day after school, we would go down, a group of us, to F.W. Woolworth on Canal Street, and we would picket. One day on the picket line, I had my sign, and two young boys, they were approximately 14, I would say, they blocked my path, and they began to harass me. They began to call me names, and they would not let me get past them. And I just stood there and looked at them. And then all at once, they both spit in my face. I want to tell you that was one of the most hurtful things that happened to me in the civil rights movement, because it's really, really bad when somebody look at you, call you names, begin to shove you around, and then spit in your face. But as I stood there, the Lord told me, forgive them. They know not what they do. And I want to tell you tonight that there's so much hatred. There was so much hatred back then, and the same as today. There's a lot of hatred in the world today. And I want to say, people, our children, our babies, they're not born with hatred. It's a learned environment. So all of this and a lot of the things you see going on, it's learned. It's a learned environment. One of those ministers who was standing by came over and wiped my face, told me to continue what we were doing, that we had to continue, and we were doing a good thing for civil rights. We realized that we realized that what we were doing, we have to do it. And we realized that it would be a very risky journey. But we had a made up mind. My mind was made up. If we die, we die. Anything worth living for is something worth dying for. So when we got involved in civil rights, each one of the civil rights workers, they were so dedicated that we were not going to let anything turn us around or stop us. Because if we wanted the change to take place, we had to be the change that we wanted to see in the world. So the Freedom Riders, some of them went back, and then some of them did come eventually to New Orleans, and they worked with us, and they helped us get trained, and they stayed a while. And then other students from across the U.S. began to come down south to help also. There was a young man, Frank Nelson Jr. He was from California. There was Ingrid, she was from California, and they came from all different states to come down and help work with CORE. Now we went on freedom rides when the bus was bombed, and they wanted them to go back. President Kennedy wanted them to stop, but his brother Bobby Kennedy was the Attorney General. And he took a stand for what was justice. He took a stand for civil rights. And so everything continued. We were not going to turn around. We were not going to stop. And we were nonviolent. So no matter what happened, you could not retaliate. I will share this with you. One day we were on the picket line, and I looked back, and my elder sister, she was following us, and we didn't let her come because she would not agree to take the training of be nonviolent. And this happened after I had been spit on. She told me the day when that happened, she said, "Sis, I'm coming, and if anybody spit on you today, it's gonna be on Canal Street." And we could not let that happen. So when we saw her following us, we had to go back and turn her around because she had to strictly adhere to being nonviolent. It was worth it all. And we could have, and some of the students, a lot of them were beaten down. Some of them went to jail. Some of them lost their life in the movement. And there was many things going on, but we were not going to stop, and we were not going to turn around. When the bus got bombed, the New Orleans group that we had formed, we decided to go on a freedom ride, and we were going to go down to Birmingham. And this was after the bus bombing. We went to Birmingham. It was Frank Nelson, the young man from California who had come to help. He was a white guy, a student. And there were the 3 black girls and myself. And we were from New Orleans. And we went to Birmingham. Freedom Riders were testers. The job was to test the facilities. Legislation had been passed that things had to change. Segregation had to end in the transportation, in the restaurants, but it was not being adhered to. So we went on a freedom ride to Birmingham. On the way back, Frank, when we got to a little town, Frank and the girls, they went into the bus station, which was white only. Now, Frank was white, so he went in first. They didn't bother Frank. And then the 3 girls got off. Their job was to go in and test, and they were black. Now, my job was to sit on the bus, and if anything happened, to call New Orleans CORE and report what had happened to them. This little town and was in Birmingham. When we moved on, we went to stopped in a little town called Poplarville. Now, Poplarville was a lynching town that had a lynching there a year or two before the Freedom Riders. And the young man was named Mac Parker Jr. He was a Black man. He was brutally beaten. He was killed, thrown into the Pearl River in Poplarville. My job, I'm on the bus, and Frank and them, a truck pull up, a young white man, a pickup truck. They went in, they literally dragged Frank and the girls out of the bus station, and they put them in the back of the pickup truck. Now, I had to do something. How do you make a phone call? We didn't have cell phones. I'm talking about it back in the 60s. We had no cell phones. How do you make a phone call? I saw a walk-in phone booth across the road. I got off the Greyhound bus, walked over to the phone booth, and while I'm on the phone, a group of a mob was gathering on the other side of the street. So the mob didn't see me in the phone booth. I was only 100 pounds at the time. I stooped down, I made my call, but I'm on the down in the phone booth. When I made the call to New Orleans to court and told them what had happened, I understand, and I didn't know it until we finally got back to New Orleans. But my fear was they were going to lynch the girls and Frank. They drove off, and then the bus pulled off and left me. I'm stranded in this little town, Poplarville. I'm in the phone booth across the road, and there's a mob looking for me. So I started praying, and I knew that I might die. If we died, we died. But we knew that when we joined CORE, when we joined the civil rights movement. So I stayed down in the phone booth, and all of a sudden a man walked out from a gas station that was further back from the road, and he was an elderly Black man. He walked past the phone booth to the end of the road. And on his way back, I managed to open the door of the phone booth to get his attention. And I told him, they're looking for me. I'm a freedom rider. Can you help me? That mob is looking for me. So he said, stay down. I'll see what I can do. So I stayed down in the phone booth, and I heard him walk over to that station. And he must have worked there because I heard him tell the two men there, I have an emergency at home. Can I use the truck? I'll be back in a little while. And they let him. He drove near the phone booth. He opened the door and told me to get in, but stay on the floor, and I'll see what I can do. And then when I got in, he said, I'm going to take you to the interstate. Maybe you can get a ride, and I'll let you off at the interstate. Now, how do a 19 or 20-year-old person get a ride 8 o'clock at night? You're in lynching town, and you're also Black. And they have just taken away 4 of our young people. He took me over to the interstate, but on the way he was praying, and he was saying, Jesus, tell me what to do. I can't put her out on the highway. I have 8 children. Lord, tell me what to do. And when we got to the interstate, he said, I can't put you out. And he said, I'll drive you all the way, but I can't put you out. So he drove all the way to New Orleans. And I want to tell you, it was 8 o'clock at night. New Orleans is 75 miles from Poplarville, Mississippi. But he took me all the way and we went to the Corps headquarters, and some of the people came out and talked to him and thanked him. And he said, please don't release this story because it will put me and my family at risk and we could possibly be murdered if they knew who got you out. Excuse me. But nevertheless, I thank God for him. We have tried in the past to find out who he was, and we were unable to do that. But nevertheless, we called one time since I've been living here. We called down to Poplarville, and I talked to someone down there, and the man, he was a black pastor, and he told me this. He said, I remember the incident. He said, but the man that helped you was not from Poplarville. So my conclusion to that matter was this. If he was not from Poplarville, and I heard his prayer, I heard what he said about his children, and then I thought, well, if he wasn't from Poplarville, then who was he? And I came to the conclusion in my heart that he was my guardian angel, that the Lord had saved my life, and that he sent the man to help me and to get me out of Poplarville. I thank God for that. The next morning, the young people that they took out of the restaurant, they were tried. Now, New Orleans group went up to Poplarville for the trial. And when they were released, they were dismissed, but they were fined a heavy fine, and then they let them go. There were 8 carloads of people from New Orleans that went up to the trial to help. Now, when we got to the courthouse, they did release the young people, and we drove back. There were 8 carloads with us from New Orleans. We were followed out of Poplarville. There were a lot of cars followed us from Poplarville. But when we got to the Louisiana state line, there was Highway Patrol, Louisiana Highway Patrol, and they had lined the highway on both sides. And I was so glad to see them because they were waiting. And the head of our group told us this. She said, after I called her, they made a call to Bobby Kennedy. He was the Attorney General at that time. And he called, we were told that he called Poplarville that night. And he let them know that he knew what had happened to the young people. And if anything happened to them, he would have the troops there in the morning. And this is how they were released and were able to go back to New Orleans with us. But the Freedom Riders continued. We continued traveling throughout the Deep South, and there were many things going on. We went to throughout Alabama, Mississippi. We went to Dallas. We were up there at one time. We went to different places, and our job was to test the facility. If you were asked to leave, you were tested and you were to stay there. If it meant going to jail, you would be arrested. We went to Alexandria, Virginia, and the girl, she was from California. She was a white German girl, came to help us. And she and I went into this white-only restaurant in Alexandria. And we were asked to leave, but we didn't leave. And we were arrested. We were in jail the whole weekend, the whole 3 days. We went to trial on Monday. And our case eventually went to the Supreme Court. But I want to say this, we were fined a heavy fine, And then we were sentenced, and then we were released. Our lawyers eventually filed it with the Supreme Court, and our case was eventually dismissed. So I'm so thankful for that. But there was much to be done because things continued to happen. And there was so much work we had to do, what we had to do. I would tell Mom when I left to go on a freedom ride, I'd say, Mom, we're going out of town. I'll see you tomorrow. But we never knew if there would be a tomorrow, if we would even live to see tomorrow. But it was worth it all. And the Freedom Riders, they paid a great price. Some of them lost their life, but they paid the price. Now people ask, would you do it again? I want to tell you all, I'll be 82 in May, and God has blessed me. He's kept me all these years, and I never thought I would ever get to the point where I am now. But I am so thankful for the movement. I'm thankful for nonviolence and the things that all the people did that worked in the civil rights movement. I did get to meet Dr. King, my sister and I. He came to New Orleans to speak. They wouldn't let him use the municipal auditorium, so the longshoremen let him use their hall for a rally. We were in school that day, but my sister and I wanted to see him. We sneaked out of the building at school, and we went over to the rally, but they wouldn't let us in because it was during school hours, and they weren't letting any young people, any kids in. When Dr. King came out, we were calling his name, and we were standing on the side. He heard us, he came over, and he surprised us. He shook his finger, and he said, how come you're not in school? And we said, we wanted to see you, Dr. King. And he said, that's good. Well, school is more important. Stay in school. So I did get to meet him. We were invited, as you heard in the introduction. Oprah Winfrey had us at her show. The National Women's Law Center had a banquet, and President Obama was the keynote speaker. So he spoke with all of us, and he thanked us. And we have been blessed. We have been so blessed because it was a non-violent movement, and God was in every step of the way, and I thank him. And if any of you have any questions, I'll be happy to try to answer some of it for you.
Thank you so much, Betty. We do definitely have some questions for you. We'll start with a question from Dale Long, who's actually speaking for us in April as well. Hi, Dale. Good to see you. He's asking how your parents felt about you joining the movement. He grew up in Birmingham and wanted to join the children's movement, but his parents forbade him to protect him.
Well, it was my mother. My dad had already moved. He was in California. So we were with my mom and her sisters. And we were a family that stuck together. Now, Mom knew, and I was very stubborn as a young person. And I always would, if I didn't get my way, I cried. I cried a lot. And the people didn't want to see me crying. For instance, when the milkman would deliver our milk, and when we ran out to the truck to get the milk, if I didn't get the milk, I would be in tears. And the milkman would make my other sisters and whoever had the milk to give me the milk because nobody wanted to see me crying. So Mom, she knew it was very dangerous, but she knew we were gonna do what we felt we had to do. And then besides that, it started with my mother because I wasn't gonna let her continue to cry. I wasn't gonna let her continue to have to go to the back of the FW Woolworth to get a lunch. No, that shouldn't be, because we were all equal.
We have another question about, you mentioned when you were describing Poplarville as a lynching town. So our guest is wondering, were there certain, as you were traveling throughout the South, were there certain towns that had this reputation of higher risk of violence or even of being killed? Was that something that followed you all as you went through?
There's quite a few towns that had a reputation for violence and things that had happened. There were people being killed, like little Emmett Till. His mom came to New Orleans for a rally. And even though I was still in school, I went to the rally to hear her. And it was very, very sad, and it was very touching. She wanted the world to see what had happened to her son, and it was very brutal. And there were other lives that were lost. There were people who were beaten. There were several freedom riders in our group that was run out of little towns. So there were plenty. Now we go home sometime and we pass through those exits for Poplarville. And my grandson always say, "Nana, can we stop and just look at the town?" No, I'm not stopping. Once was enough, and that's it.
Yeah, that sounds like that was plenty. We have another question about what kind of charges would be brought against members of the group. So the group that was arrested in Poplarville, or even when you were arrested, what kind of charges were they bringing, whether they were made up or otherwise?
They were breach of the peace. Now, how can you have peace when you got signs all over your place saying white only? And I want to share this with you. When I moved to Cincinnati. When I came to Cincinnati, there were signs here in this city. And I thought I was coming north, but I found out there were a lot of Southern traditions, even here. There was a dentist downtown, and he had white and colored signs in his waiting rooms. And he was right down near Shillitoe's. And we were called to go down and picket one day. And it was just a few things going on. Kings Island, for instance. Took the kids to Kings Island. And Coney Island, I'm sorry. Kings Island was later, but Coney Island was segregated. And I got pictures now of my little kids sitting on the bench outside of Coney Island, but it wasn't for Black people. And there were other things, and I just thought, did I come north, or is this still south? But if you want change, you've got to be the change you want to see happen.
I think you are.
Did that answer your question?
Yes, ma'am. I think so. You mentioned Dr. King. We have someone who'd like to know if you ever cross paths with John Lewis.
Oh, yes, I've got pictures at home. Oprah Winfrey, there's me, Oprah, John Lewis, and a couple of other people. And when we went to her show, she honored the Freedom Riders, their 50th anniversary. And we were invited to go to Washington. I've got pictures, and that's something, if you talk to Michelle, maybe later on, get with her, and there's plenty of photos that you will be able to see. And I want to say that Oprah has a book. It's called Reflections of an American Legacy. And she brought that out. And the Freedom Riders are in there. You'll see us in there, and you'll see her, and there are lots of pictures.
We have a question from Rabbi Fish, who's in the audience. He lived in New Orleans in the late 70s and knew that Rabbi Julian Feibelman was supportive of the civil rights movement. So he wanted to know if you ever came across Rabbi Feibelman, and were there other members of the white New Orleans community who were helping you and helping CORE?
Oh, yeah. There were other members, and there were people that came from other states down to help. And I thank God for them because they laid their lives on the line. And I don't know if I knew Reverend Fiberman, but possibly, And now I'm at the stage where I remember faces, but I don't always remember the names.
Understandable. This is a simple question with probably not a so simple answer, but someone would like to know where you get your courage from. I mean, it's unbelievable what you faced, and so young too.
Well, I'll tell you what I told you a little bit ago. I was always wanted things to go my way, and whatever it took, I was going to be one of those people who I call myself feisty. And my mom, well, I just had to do what I had to do.
Speaking of your mom, actually, someone asked if she ever got the chance to vote.
Eventually, she did get to vote. And so, I was awfully glad. And then when I saw all the demonstrations up here last year or this year about the voting registration, it is so important that people learn their rights, and we have rights. But there are people who would not want you to know that. There are people who will do anything to prevent that. But we have to take a stand. But it's always the right time to do the right thing and to do it the right way.
I have a question that sort of goes with that. Someone's asking, so you were a freedom writer in the early 60s, and then we saw two major pieces of civil rights legislation. So the Civil Rights Act in 1964 and the Voting Rights Act in 1965. When those happened, what did that feel like? I mean, was there any immediate change that you felt, or was it a more gradual process? Can you talk a little bit about that?
It was immediate, but it was still a risk. It was a big risk, like even getting on the bus, even because the first night that they desegregated the public buses, I wanted to go and get a bus that night around midnight and just ride and sit where I wanted to sit. But unfortunately, CORE wouldn't let me do that because I was going to do it anyway by myself if I had to, but they wouldn't let me do it. But nevertheless, we had to continue to do whatever it is we had to do. And that was very important. Some of the members, our CORE members who lived there in New Orleans, they went to jail several times there in New Orleans at the parish prison. And there was just still so much going on, but you had to do what you had to do.
We have another question about kind of help along the way. Did any white churches or other organizations help you along the way by offering shelter or food or other support? So not just the New Orleans group, but kind of as you were traveling as well?
Oh, yes, there were many. And I have to say there are many good people in this world. And I say that often, and this is one of the reasons I chose Cincinnati as my home. I tell everybody now that this is my home, Cincinnati, because there are a lot of good people, and you come in contact with people who are good people. There's a lot of hatred in the world today, but it doesn't matter. And I want to tell people, it doesn't matter what you say. It doesn't matter what you do. I'm going to do what's right, and I'm going to love you anyway.
We've had a few questions that I'm going to combine into one. We've got a few educators in the audience and folks who are really invested in young people. Do you have any advice for young people who are interested in social justice work, who perhaps young African American children who are facing racism for the first time. What advice would you give young people who are looking at what's happening or looking into this work and want to help?
Well, the one thing that was very hard for me to accept is the violence, so much hatred. And this is something we still face every day. But we need to realize, and I've raised my children in this way, you're not invisible. There are many people who will make you invisible simply because of the color of your skin. And I use an example of that is I found a lot when I would go shopping here. And many times I would be waiting in line or sitting at the counter and somebody else would walk up and the clerk I could have been standing there for an hour, but she would not show recognition. So that I had to overcome and realize that, we're important. We're God's children. We're important. And I was thinking today, was about the scripture that said we're treasures in earthen vessels, and we are. So we're important, and people need to show respect, and most of all, to love one another. And we need to stress that with our young people. It's so much violence going on, so it's really sad.
Yeah, it's so important. CORE brought together people of all backgrounds from different states, as you mentioned, different ways they grew up. Was the cause that everyone was coming together kind of enough to unite the group, or when you were training, did you all go through any exercises to help bring everyone together across these lines of difference?
I'm not sure I heard all of your question.
Yeah, so I guess the basic question is, there were so many different kinds of people in CORE, different backgrounds, different races. Did you all have to do anything special to try to come together as a group and learn about each other? Anything in your training that helped with that?
Well, the one thing I did tell you, when I started talking, was the one good thing about on the civil rights movement and people like Dr. King and people like John Lewis, and people who really knew, and the Lord was in the movement. When we got on the buses to go on the Freedom Ride, there were songs that the Freedom Riders sang, and they lived it and they meant it. And it was like, we shall overcome. I'm not gonna let anybody turn me around. And it brought us through. And that really made a difference. And that's the only thing, so it had to be. And I really am thankful for that because he was there all the time. I can remember one time saying a prayer, and I asked God a question in my prayer because I'd had a bad accident. And I said, Lord, where were you when I needed you? And my answer came, and it said, I was there all the time, and he's always been there.
We have someone who would like to know if you're going to write a book about your experiences. Have you ever thought about that?
I started one. Yes, I'm going to complete it one of these days. And then I write poetry. And when I was in 8th grade, I've been writing since I was in 8th grade. And I wrote Langston Hughes because he was my favorite poet. And he wrote me a letter, the nicest letter. And I sent him a poem. And I gave the letter to my mom. She kept it by her bedside in a frame. And she died in 1982. She loved the letter from Langston Hughes. So, I write. I'm going to finish that book, but I write poetry. And I'm sure Michelle will tell you she's been on the typewriter for the last 2 days and and doing some of my poems. I've got over 300 so far.
Wow. Well, if you finish that book, we want to know. All right, we're gonna ask just one or two more questions, if that's okay.
That's okay.
We'll do what? How did the Freedom Riders movement end? Was it because of the legislation that came out, or what did the end of that movement look like?
The legislation came out, but it still needed a lot of work. But thank God for the people there were good people who joined the movement. There were people who worked very hard. There were people who stood up for what was right. And that made all the difference. So we haven't got where we ought to be yet. It's still being worked on, but there's still work to do. And there's plenty of work to do. And the first thing I would like to say to people is to love one another. To love one another as God has commanded us to love Him. If we do that, when we realize that this would be a much better world. Now, with this pandemic, the one thing all you kept hearing during this time, what people were quoting 2 Chronicles 7:14. If my people, which are called by my name, would humble themselves and pray and seek my face, then I will hear from heaven and heal their land. So it's up to us. We got plenty of work to do.
Last question for you. What gives you hope? We have plenty of work to do, as you said, but what gives you hope for the future?
Well, because I know what's promised. I know the promises, and I know what's waiting in the end, but we got to do something. So once you know that, and there are many good songs I love, and my daughter knows, she know I talk a lot, so I hope I'm not talking too much.
No, you're perfect.
But
Well,
there's a song I love to hear, and I love gospel. And this is, I stood on the banks of Jordan and saw to see the ships go sailing by. And one verse says, Lord, I've got my ticket. Please don't leave me down here. So I don't know how other people feel. Got my ticket.
Well, this has been wonderful talking with you. I want to thank so much Mrs. Betty Daniels Rosemond for joining us tonight. I want to thank Miss Michelle Rosemond, who you all haven't seen, but Betty's daughter who's in the background tonight helping us out. Thank you, Michelle. And of course, thank you so much to all the sponsors of the exhibit, the community partners, everyone who makes programs like these possible. We hope to talk to you soon, Betty. We very much appreciate you sharing your story, and I think it's given all of us a lot to think about, and so inspirational to hear of your courage in the face of so much that you went through.
Well, anytime I'll be happy to come talk to you. Anytime. We still have a lot of work to do, but I'm getting old now, and I don't, but I'm thankful for that because there's a lot going on, but I'm here on a mission for Him.
We appreciate you taking the time to be with us tonight. Thank you all again so much for joining us. We hope to see you soon. Have a great night. Stay well, stay safe, everybody. Thank you.